Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn with Blue Sky Bio, and I'm going to show a quick little hack that can really make a neat way of making a temporary prosthetic for a patient. So let's suppose that you are going to do a full mouth implant rehab, that you're going to do, let's say, a bone reduction, placement of 4 to 6 implants, and then immediate load. Well, we're going to have to come up with some way of making them a prosthetic that they can wear during that time. Now, the way I've historically done that is that I've just gone into the denture module and I've just designed it from scratch. You would be able to pull in something like this, and that's great. That does work really well. But another really cool idea that can take even less time is if the patient's got a relatively good dentition, as they do in this case. You can see right here that most of the teeth are present. We know they're the right shape and size for the patient because they're their own teeth. They're the ones God gave them. But the problems are that rarely are people's teeth going to be lined up perfectly. So what we can do is use their exact same teeth, but let's just modify them. What I'm going to do is take the orthodontic module within Blue Sky Plan. I'm going to position these teeth. I'm going to close this anterior open bite. I'm going to fix some of the issues that you see right here, maybe bring back the incisors a little bit from where they flared with the perio, and then this is going to then become my my prosthetic, my immediate load prosthetic. And again, it should blend right in because it's the patient's own teeth. So let me go ahead and show you how we go about doing this. What I'm going to do is go ahead and click in the upper right corner, and we're going to change over to the orthodontic module. Now, the orthodontic module is going to force you to kind of start from the beginning, and so what I need to do is bring in the mandible and the maxilla. We'll pull that in. And then we need to import the opposing arch. And here we have it. Okay, so I don't need to do a whole lot of work. Really, I'm just going to focus on aligning the front 6 teeth of both arches. And so what we need to do is first go ahead and tell it that we're working on the maxilla first, and we're going to continue to the jaw alignment. And so it's going to ask me to annotate the teeth. So what you need to do here is just go ahead and click on the mesial and the distal of each tooth. It's going to give you a pattern of what teeth you need to proceed with. If it's a tooth that you don't want to rotate, just right click in the site of those teeth, and then we can come back and start on the remaining dentition. Now we hit continue to segmentation, and we will need to correct the tooth margins here. And so if you look and you see that this is not lined up perfectly like you see right here, you could hold down shift and just redraw the line. And you don't want to make these have too much overlap right at the contact point, so I'm going to make sure that I keep this just slightly off of one another without much overlap. And we'll just repeat this process now with all of the teeth that we intend to move around. Okay, so we got all the tooth segmentation done, and now we're at the point of what I was really wanting to do, which is to now be able to move individual teeth around and get these things positioned. So obviously, let's close that anterior open bite. We can probably retract the teeth slightly. And all I'm going to do is just jump around here, aligning these teeth to what would, generally be considered ideal. And so, again, same general tooth shapes, same teeth for this patient, just tweaked a little bit. So they're going to literally have some instant orthodontics. These teeth will get removed, and then their exact same teeth are going to go in, but in a brand new alignment. Okay, and with that, we've pretty much aligned all the teeth as much as I want to, and so we will now go to continue, and now we're going to export this. Now, for the exporting, I don't need all of these models. I really just want the final model that we generated. So I'll come up here to export data, turn everything off here, and let's see, for the mandible, let's do the final one here, and then for the maxilla. Now you're going to notice I'm checking both of these on, which is going to combine them into one STL. If you wanted to, you could individually export these and not have to worry about that, but for me, I'm okay to separate those out once I get into Mesh Mixer. So I'm going to say aligned models. And now in Mesh Mixer, I'm going to open up her aligned models. But unfortunately, what you're going to see is that these are not properly oriented. So how are we going to overcome that? The answer is we're going to have to go back into our original surgical planning case. Okay, this is where all the implants and everything were done, and we're going to need to bring in that STL model. Of the aligned jaws. We don't need to stitch them right now because what we're going to do is just bring them in, okay? So here you see that they've been brought in, the upper and lower simultaneously, but they are not correctly oriented. And so there's a few ways that we can do this. The easy way is let's just go old school here and let's stitch these things via points, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. And this one, I'm going to say maxilla, and the one above, mandible. All right, and what you're going to see is that if we were to go back to our original DICOM, you see that the patient was scanned with an open bite. So if I just stitched both of them to the upper, the lower's not going to be in the right position relative to the upper. Okay, so what I've got to instead do is I've duplicated this. I've got the original STL of the lower oriented in space. I've got the upper oriented space, but they're not in the correct bite. All right, and so let's do the mandible first. All right, what I'm going to do is down here in your surfaces panel, I'm going to say isolate and just click on the mandible. That gets me this one aligned, and let's hide this, and I'm going to go old school here. I'm going to say stitch the mandible by points to the blue one. And if you're having flashbacks of the old days when you had to stitch STLs to DICOMs via this method, this is exactly what we're going to do. Now remember, excuse me, about to hack up a lung here. Remember that I've altered a lot of the anterior teeth, so I can't exactly use those as good stitching points. Rather, what I need to do is just align based on teeth that I know have been unaltered. We'll click OK, and now you see that that pulls this one back into alignment. All those posterior teeth are exactly lined up. If I was to even go back in and look at the tooth alignment, we could turn on the hint for this mandible and we could look at it. And let's see, is that thing in fact stitched properly back here on the posterior teeth? And in fact, you see that it is. Okay, so that's one arch down. Let's hide that one now and do the exact same thing with our upper. All right, this time, remember I duplicated these, and so how do we get rid of the mandible this time? We say isolate just the maxilla, and now we're going to stitch maxilla via points to the green model. And here you see the result. We have this back in its correct global position. See the stippling between these, but now with the teeth aligned. Okay, we close the open bite in the anterior, and so everything is lined up now. So the last remaining thing that I'm sure you're wondering is, okay, how in the heck does this translate to actually making a hybrid out of that? So I'm going to demonstrate just via the maxillary. Let me first save these models now that they are oriented properly. I'm only going to export the two of these. I'm going to replace aligned models with these, override it, and now let's look in Mesh Mixer. So here we have our maxilla. This maxilla is the shape of the already reduced maxilla. For my case planning, I did a bone reduction guide, so I know what the shape of the jaw is going to look like. I can now pull these in, and this is the correct orientation of the mandible and the maxilla, not to one another, but relative to the jaws, because these are going to be stacked off the jaws. That's what's going to orient them into place. So let me double click this one and separate it, and I'm going to hide that mandible. All right, last thing that we need to do here. We're missing some teeth, okay? And so if you wanted to see if you wanted to fill in this tooth, let's go back into our surgical case. And what I'm going to do is find a tooth. Hide those nerves. And let's just add a tooth here. We can use, let's use the Mitchhurst-Pontic library. We need that molar. I'm going to move this into position and do a really quick and dirty wax up. Let's make it skinnier. All right, now we've got that. You're going to notice we've also got some problems here where the intraoral scan didn't capture everything. Let me just export this, the single tooth wax up. And then pull it back into Mesh Mixer here, because this is where I'm going to actually turn it into the prosthetic, okay? So you can see these are not connected. How are we going to get them connected? We're going to need to inflate this. So in my sculpting brushes, I'll grab the inflate tool. All right, so that's going to connect. I also need to fix these areas where the intraoral scan just did not capture this, and so I'll do that by deleting the undercut area, smooth the boundary, accept it, and then erase and fill. And that looks good for our purposes. Need to repeat over here. And it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it will work. I mean, We don't have to have this absolutely perfect, okay? And if you want to get fancy, you know, knock yourself out, but I don't think it's going to really be necessary. If I wanted to do it, I would come in here with an inflate, and I would take my size down and my strength down, and I'd hold control, and I'd make a gingival margin. And then smooth it up. All right, and now combine that with your first molar. And there you have it. Okay, this is the completed wax up. Let's now make this a solid. I'm going to take the accuracy all the way to the maximum. Okay. And then I need again to turn this into an actual restoration. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, let's suppose, and I've shown this in other videos, let's suppose that you wanted to make sure that your restoration is sitting uniformly off of this now segmented and reduced maxilla. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come in here and select this whole surface. Smooth the boundary. And then offset this. So if I wanted to be sure that I had a uniform 2 millimeters of space for tissue to reside, then I would make my offsetting distance be 2 millimeters. And I'll accept that, right? While this is all highlighted, you could smooth it, and let's accept that. And then finally, I'm going to separate this into its own STL. Like that. Now, you'll probably want to come up here and smooth out these boundaries and such. And basically what we're going to do is I would like to Boolean subtract this, which is the what we're going to subtract from our jaw, from this, which is our restoration. Now you can't really Boolean that unless though this is an object. So the easy fix for that is to now take this and let's just turn this into a three-dimensional object. So if you set analysis inspector, it's going to say, hey, you got a giant hole here. So let's just let this thing fill it in. And it doesn't want to fill it, of course, because I'm making a video. So we need to give it a little help. There's a lot of ways you can close this. You could plane cut it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and just grab like that piece, and let's bridge them. Okay. And now it's going to see, hey, this is a hole between these. Let's fill that in. So inspector, fix that. And you'll get something like this. I'm going to accept it. And here you see the Boolean restoration, we'll call it. You'll have a little cleanup to do, which is no big deal. Just come up here and we can cut out some of the interconnecting parts. Let's delete that. So I'm not going to belabor the point too much. Now you can see the idea is that we've got this, what we're calling a restoration that sits a uniform distance right off the ridge. I can now smooth this and shape it to my little heart's content. We can make this more rounded and ovate on the underside. It's just a matter of how much you want to invest into it. I think, frankly, for me, the easiest thing to do would just be to print this and then shape it by hand. I know that's a dirty word to many people to have to pick up a lab burr, but it works. So what we've been able to do, though, is just take their existing dentition, modify it, correct it, knowing that it's going to be the right size, shape, position, all that kind of stuff for this actual patient because it's their original teeth. It's not going to be such a dramatic change. They're not going to have big horse teeth like I sometimes see with this kind of stuff. Rather, they'll be able to have something pretty darn close to their current dentition, but improved. So new and improved dentition, and for your pickups, you could now subtract out the holes for the restoration, or I'm sorry, for the implant temp cylinders and all that fun stuff. But in any case, I hope that you found that helpful.